This module starts with a story of an organization that suffered a major data breach where almost 150 million people's data have been stolen. Most organizations that suffer breaches do survive if they respond properly. This module covers what a proper response looks like, the 72-hour legal clock, who you must notify and when, what individuals should do when they receive a breach notification, and to close part 4, how almost every data breach connects back to something we've already covered in this course. September 2017. Equifax, one of the largest credit reporting agencies in the world, disclosed that the personal data of approximately 147 million people had been stolen. Names, dates of birth, social security numbers, addresses, and in some cases, driving license details. The breach had gone undetected for 78 days. The root cause, an unpatched vulnerability in a software component, for which a publicly available fix had existed for 2 months. The damage was vast, hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and settlements, the resignation of the CEO and CISO, lasting harm to individuals whose most sensitive identity data was now in criminal hands. And yet Equifax survived. Most organizations that suffer breaches do survive if they respond properly. The organizations that do not survive are typically those that compounded the original breach with a botched response, concealment, delay, inadequate communication, and failure to notify as required by law. A breach is not the end. How you respond determines what happens next. Under GDPR, a personal data breach is defined as a security incident that leads to the accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of, or access to, personal data. That definition maps directly to the CIA triad from Module 2. A confidentiality breach. Personal data was accessed or disclosed to someone who should not have it through a hack, an accidental email, misconfigured access controls, or insider misuse. The harm. Identity theft, fraud, embarrassment, discrimination, or physical danger, for example. The exposure of a domestic abuse victim's address. An integrity breach. Personal data was altered without authorization. Medical records changed, financial details modified, identity falsified. The harm. Decisions made on wrong information. Wrong medical treatment, incorrect credit scoring, false criminal records, an availability breach. Personal data was lost or made unavailable. Ransomware encrypting patient records, a device lost containing the only copy of data. The harm. Inability to deliver services, delayed treatment, legal noncompliance. One important correction about how breaches are usually portrayed. Media coverage focuses on sophisticated attacks against large organizations. In practice, the majority of personal data breaches reported to supervisory authorities involve far less dramatic causes. Emails sent to the wrong recipient, documents left in public places, files accidentally made publicly accessible through misconfigured cloud storage, laptops lost on public transport. The legal obligations apply regardless of how the breach happened. When a personal data breach occurs, GDPR places specific obligations on the organization. These are not optional and apply to all organizations that process personal data of EU or UK residents, regardless of size. Obligation 1. Notify the supervisory authority. When a breach is likely to result in a risk to individuals' rights and freedoms, the organization must notify its National Data Protection Authority within 72 hours of becoming aware. In the UK, that is the ICO. In Poland, the UODO. In France, the CNIL. Obligation 2. Notify affected individuals. When the breach is likely to result in a high risk to individuals' rights and freedoms, a higher threshold, the organization must also notify the affected people without undue delay. The notification must explain what happened, what data was involved, the likely consequences, and what measures are being taken. Obligation 3. Document all breaches internally. All personal data breaches must be documented internally, regardless of whether they meet the threshold for external notification. The documentation requirement applies even to breaches that do not need to be reported externally. Obligation 4. Assess risk and act proportionately. Not every breach requires external notification. The obligation to notify depends on a risk assessment. Organizations must be able to show they assessed the breach and made a reasoned, documented decision. Now, the 72-hour clock and what it actually means in practice. The window starts from when the organization becomes aware of the breach, not from when the breach occurred. This distinction matters enormously. If a breach occurred 3 months ago but was only discovered today, the 72-hour clock starts today. If the breach is discovered on a Friday afternoon, the 72 hours run through the weekend. There is no weekend exemption. If the organization cannot complete the notification within 72 hours, it can send a provisional notification explaining that the investigation is ongoing. Waiting for complete information before notifying at all is not acceptable. Organizations that discover a breach and then spend time deciding whether they have to notify are already burning through their notification window. The risk assessment and notification preparation must happen simultaneously. What should happen in the hours and days after a breach is discovered follows a consistent structure. Hours 0 to 24. Detect and contain. Disconnect affected systems. Preserve evidence. Do not delete files. Do not clear logs. Convene the incident response team. Begin assessing what happened. Common mistakes. Destroying evidence by wiping affected systems. Concealing the breach. Not escalating fast enough. Hours 24 to 48. Assess the scope. What data was involved? How many people affected? What risk does this create for individuals? Preparation of the supervisory notification must begin if the threshold is met. Common mistake. Under-assessing scope, assuming the breach is smaller than it is before the investigation is complete. Hours 48 to 72. Notify the supervisory authority if required. The initial notification can be provisional if the full picture is not yet available. Do not delay to wait for complete information. Common mistake, missing the deadline precisely because the organization waited for certainty before acting. 72 hours and beyond. Notify affected individuals without undue delay for high-risk breaches. Continue remediation. Document everything, all decisions, all actions, all communications. When an organization notifies affected individuals, the communication must contain a clear, plain language description of what happened, what categories of data were involved, the likely consequences, the measures being taken, contact details for questions, and specific advice on what individuals should do to protect themselves. Being told your personal data has been breached is unsettling. The right response depends on what type of data was involved. You receive a breach notification from a service. Read it carefully to understand what data was exposed. Change your password for that service immediately, even if not asked to. Enable MFA if not already active. Check whether you use the same password on other services. Credential stuffing, covered in Module 6, means a breach at one site puts every other account using that password at risk. Your financial data was involved. Contact your bank immediately. Ask them to monitor your account for unusual activity. If payment card details were exposed, consider requesting a new card. Longer term, check your credit report for new credit applications you did not make. Consider a credit freeze if identity theft is suspected. Your login credentials were exposed. Change the password on the affected service immediately. Change it on every other service where you use the same password. starting with your email account. Then check haveabeenpwned.com to see whether your email appears in other known breaches. Enable MFA on the affected account and on your email as a priority. Sensitive personal data was exposed. Health records, identity documents, or your home address. For health data, be alert to insurance fraud or blackmail attempts. For address and identity data, be alert to identity theft and physical security implications if the exposure was targeted. You discover your organization has suffered a breach. Report to your information security team or manager immediately. Preserve all evidence. Do not attempt to fix or conceal the breach. Activate the incident response process from Module 15. A practical tool worth making a habit. Visit haveabeenpwned.com and enter your email address. The site aggregates data from hundreds of known breaches and tells you whether your email has appeared in any of them. It is free, legitimate, and operated by a respected security researcher. Set up the notification feature so you are alerted automatically if your email appears in a future breach. Organizations do not always handle breach notifications well. They may notify too late, provide inadequate information, downplay the severity, or fail to notify at all. As an individual whose data was involved, you have recourse. Make a complaint to your national supervisory authority. Every EU member state has a data protection supervisory authority, the ICO in the UK, the UODO in Poland, the CNIL in France. The authority has the power to investigate and impose fines. Seek compensation. Under GDPR Article 82, individuals who have suffered material or non-material damage as a result of a GDPR breach have the right to claim compensation. Non-material damage includes distress, anxiety, and loss of control over personal data, not just direct financial loss. Exercise your GDPR rights. Following a breach, you may wish to exercise your right of access to understand what data was involved, your right to erasure, or your right to rectification. These rights were covered in Module 13. And now the integration that makes Part 4 complete. A data breach is not an isolated event. It is the outcome when one or more of the defenses covered in Parts 2 and 3 failed. Working backwards through a breach reveals exactly which controls were absent. The breach happened because of a phishing attack, that is Module 4. Because of an unpatched vulnerability, Module 11. Because credentials were reused and credential stuffing succeeded, Module 6. Because the attacker had access to more data than they needed, Modules 10 and 13. Because it went undetected for months, Module 15. Because recovery was slower than needed, because backups had not been tested, Module 16. A breach is not bad luck. It is the result of a specific combination of things that went wrong, and most of those things have specific, learnable countermeasures. Countermeasures that are now in this course's rear-view mirror. Part 4 is complete. 3 modules that address what happens when defenses fail: spotting and reporting incidents, backups and recovery, and data breaches. Part 5 shifts to the long game: security as a mindset, culture, and continuous practice. Module 18 starts with the habits that make everything you have learned sustainable. Alright, before we move on, here are the 3 things from this module I want you to hold on to. Number 1, a breach is not the end. Organizations that respond properly survive. Those that conceal, delay, or fail to notify typically do not. Number 2, the 72-hour GDPR clock starts when you become aware, not when the breach occurred. No weekend exception. Provisional notification is acceptable. Number 3, a breach is not bad luck. It is the outcome when specific defenses failed. Every module in this course addresses a specific link in that chain. Now, before you move on, there is one question. A company discovers on Tuesday morning that its customer database was accessed by an unauthorized third party at some point over the previous weekend. When does the 72-hour GDPR notification clock start? The correct answer is B. The 72-hour clock starts when the organization becomes aware, not when the breach happened. The distinction is critical and deliberate. Organizations cannot control when a breach occurred, but they can control how fast they respond once they know. From Tuesday morning, the organization has 72 hours to assess, and if the breach meets the threshold, notify the supervisory authority. If the investigation is not complete by then, a provisional notification, investigation ongoing, is acceptable. What is not acceptable is waiting for complete information before notifying at all. Next up, Module 18, Save Digital Habits. See you there.